Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Woods, and I've decided I'm going to try something different. I'm going to start talking a little bit about true crime cases I've watched on Investigation Discovery and or Hulu. There are two cases in particular that stuck with me since I was in middle school. They are the abduction murders of Sara Anne Wood, age 12, and Holly Piirainen, age 10. Both girls disappeared in August 1993, and at the time I was close in age to both of them. Sara went missing from Frankfort, New York, and Holly went missing from Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So just a couple of states away from each other, and I was nearby in Maine at the time. About 15 years ago, I read a book called No Tomorrows by Joanne Connors Wade, which talked a little bit about both cases, mainly about Holly, a little bit about Sara, and it talked about other cases as well. I also listened to Richard Price's podcast on Holly called Holly's Been Taken, which came out within the last couple of years. Right now, I'm reading a book called Hidden Demons, Evil Visits a Small New England Town by Marjorie B. Metzger, which is about Louis Lent and his connection to Sara Anne Wood's murder. About 10 years ago, I watched an episode of Dark Minds on Investigation Discovery called Blonde, Blue-Eyed, and Gone. I rewatched it recently in order to discuss it in this video. It's going to be the focus of my discussion today. I will give a brief recap of that episode and share some of my thoughts on it. Dark Minds is a show narrated by M. William Phelps. Also in the show is criminal profiler John Kelly. If you're not familiar with Phelps, he's written several true crime books. I read his book Never See Them Again, which was about a multiple murder that happened in a Texas home and the shocking revelation of who the killers were. I also read Too Young to Kill, which was about the brutal murder of teenager Adrienne Reynolds by her friends. I'm not really that much of a fan of Phelps' style. It feels a bit sensationalistic. In the opening credits of Dark Minds, he states that his sister-in-law was murdered, so I understand he has a personal connection to true crime, and I don't want to accuse him of being exploitative. I think he is truly passionate about these cases. I just have a hard time viewing his take on them as completely unbiased. In Blonde, Blue-Eyed, and Gone, he talks about the disappearances of 4 young girls over the course of almost 30 years. The girls' names are Janice Pocket, Lisa White, Holly Piirainen, and Molly Bish. And I want to mention that he has a personal connection to the Lisa White case because he knew her younger sister. The girls range in ages from 7 to 16. All they really have in common is that they have blonde hair, blue eyes, and they disappeared from New England towns under mysterious circumstances. Only Holly and Molly have been found. They were tragically murdered. Janice and Lisa disappeared in the early 70s. I've already mentioned that Holly went missing in August 1993. Molly went missing in June 2000. I remember reading years ago that Molly wrote a letter to Holly's family shortly after Holly's disappearance in the summer of 1993. So easy to get those names confused. There was also a missing girl in 1993 named Polly, so Holly, Molly, and Polly, all very tragic cases, all ones I've been familiar with for a very long time. Anyway, in the letter to Holly's family, Molly said that she was very sad to hear about what had happened to the little girl. Molly was the same age as Holly, just as I was. And eerily, Molly would go missing 7 years later. Both girls disappeared from Massachusetts, only Molly disappeared from Warren and Holly from Sturbridge. Phelps discusses this uncanny connection between Holly and Molly. Janice and Lisa, on the other hand, disappeared from Connecticut about a year apart back in the early 70s. Janice was 7 and Lisa was 13. Janice disappeared while riding her bike in Toland, Connecticut to locate a dead butterfly she'd been looking at earlier. And Lisa disappeared while walking home from a friend's house. Phelps interviews the younger sisters of Janice and Lisa, and we learn a little bit about who these girls were and the circumstances of their disappearances. I just want to say that I'm skeptical about the cases of these two girls being linked to the missing girl cases from 20 to 30 years later. Yes, they happened fairly close to each other. 2 happened in Connecticut in the 70s, as mentioned, and 2 in Massachusetts in the 90s and early 2000s. But so much time passed between the first 2 and the second 2 that it doesn't seem likely it would be the same perpetrator unless there were other victims of his in between those years that weren't mentioned or that aren't known about. It's certainly not impossible that he could have had a long stretch of time where he didn't kill anyone. Just look at BTK. Also, he could have been in prison for several years. But it's equally possible that the cases aren't linked. I don't think the fact that the girls were all blonde-haired is enough of a link. But I'm a bit biased because I feel strongly that Holly was killed by a man named Louis Lent. Let me get into a little more detail about Holly before I tell you why I feel this way. I am very familiar with Holly's case because of my attachment to it since middle school. She disappeared while going to see a litter of puppies with her 5-year-old brother. Her brother left her side because he got spooked by something, and as a result, she was on her own at that point. She was never seen again. Only her shoe was left behind, and a couple of months later, her remains were found by hunters in the woods. Phelps discusses all of this, but here is the personal aspect of this case for me. I first learned about Holly while visiting Sturbridge Village around late September or early October of 1993. I think I might have seen her poster in a toll booth or two, but I definitely remember seeing it in one of the buildings at Sturbridge Village. By this point, I was already fixated on the disappearance of another girl from a couple of states away, named Sara Anne Wood. She was 2 years older than Holly and didn't really look anything like her. She had shoulder-length brown hair and went missing while riding her bike home from the local church. I first saw Sarah's missing poster at an ice cream stand around mid-September 1993 in Maine, so several states away from New York where Sarah went missing. I'm not sure why it stuck with me, why this case stuck with me. I had read or heard about other missing children that resonated with me around that time, but none of them to this extent. I thought about Sarah constantly. I envisioned what she must have been like, imagining her dancing in her room to Billy Joel just like I did. I have no idea if she even was familiar with Billy Joel. His River of Dreams album came out the same month she vanished, and I'm not sure if she would have been a fan of his earlier stuff. But I love Billy Joel and just projected that onto her too, because I felt this closeness to her. Years later, I would find out that she was a dancer. Interesting side note, Billy Joel had a song called Blonde Over Blue on the River of Dreams album that reminds me of the title of this Dark Minds episode. To this day, I connect Billy Joel with the cases of Holly and Sarah, in large part because I was listening to the songs of Billy Joel all the time back when I was thinking of Sarah and Holly constantly. But also now, as an adult, going back and listening to some of these songs with a new ear, it occurs to me that there are eerie echoes of these cases in the lyrics that I wouldn't have picked up on at the time because I only had part of the picture. So I can't help but think, is it possible that Sarah was reaching out to me through the music? Now, in all fairness, one of these songs that hit me especially hard as an adult is No Man's Land, and I don't think I was listening to that as a kid. I think that may have been one of the songs I skipped over. I can't remember. But now, like, listening to those lyrics, there's a reference in there to a multiplex, and one of Louis Lent's victims was a little boy who was kidnapped from a cinema. And there's another line in that song that takes part of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, and it alters it for the sake of the song. And that's a lyric, or that's a part of the prayer that I especially apply to Lent because of its connection to Lent. And because of that, I think to myself, could that have been Sarah saying, Lent, focus on that word Lent? I don't know. Once again, I don't think that No Man's Land was a song I was listening to back then. I listened to Great Wall of China, Blonde Over Blue, which, once again reminds me of the title of this Dark Minds episode now, looking back. Shades of Grey, River of Dreams. River of Dreams in and of itself is such a poignant song that makes me think about how, like, all of us are just basically moving towards the same direction. We're all going to end up one day, hopefully in heaven. We're all going to be part of, we're all going to be one. And that song makes me think of that. And it makes, of course it makes me think of my spiritual connection to these two lost girls. I don't think I was listening to No Man's Land, but it's the first song on the album. And now looking at it, I can't help but wonder, were there clues there that I missed that I should have been paying more attention to? But of course, at the time, I wouldn't have been able to make anything out of it. It's like anytime someone's psychic, they never know, what these clues mean until they have the bigger picture. And I think that's just life in and of itself, and why being psychic is really, it doesn't exist, because we can't see the big picture. We can only see fragments, and that's the case for everyone. When I saw the missing poster for Holly shortly after, during our family trip, I started thinking about her all of the time as well, though not quite so much as I thought about Sarah. I still remember reading the newspaper article stating that Holly was found dead. I read that news on October 24th, a day after it happened. I remember it was a Sunday. I had gone to the theater that day, I think to see Godspell, if memory serves. I don't want to divulge too much personal info, but suffice it to say that something else happened that day that made it stick out in my memory. And that night, I remember working on a haunted forest with my dad and cousins. I played a little missing girl named Jacqueline in that haunted forest production, and had even made a realistic-looking missing poster as a prop. I remember my grandmother and my mother hadn't liked that missing poster. They thought it was too morbid. Sarah's killer was caught in January 1994, though her remains still have not been found. I read about it in the newspaper, back when it happened. It is assumed that Louis Lent killed her because he confessed. He was also tied to the murder of a 12-year-old boy from Massachusetts named Jimmy Bernardo, and the attempted abduction of a 12-year-old girl named Rebecca in Massachusetts as well. He has links to both New York and Massachusetts. It's not unreasonable to think he could have snatched Holly as well, and in fact, the book I'm reading now, called Hidden Demons, lists him as a possible suspect. And the podcast, Holly's Been Taken, also briefly mentioned him as a possible suspect. But it doesn't seem that he has been as seriously considered as some others have, though I can only go by what I've read and heard and don't know all of the facts. I admit, a huge reason why I feel he might have killed Holly is because of the way I have linked both Sarah and Holly in my mind, and feel this connection to them that I've never felt with any other missing child. I find it incredibly eerie that I first became obsessed with Sarah not long before my one and only trip to Sturbridge Village in the fall of 1993. I learned about Holly during that trip because she disappeared from Sturbridge, and her posters were all around that area. I can't help but think, what if the two girls connected with me as a way to warn me, since they knew I would be in the area where one of them went missing? I know it sounds far-fetched, but it still gives me goosebumps to think about. And besides, even if it's not true, it's a good story, so I'm sticking to it. It's nice to think that there are people out there who have passed on, who may be looking over your shoulder, even though they didn't know you in this life. And it's also equally nice to think that when you do die, there are people who are still on this earth who didn't know you, but who feel like they did, and who connect with you, and who would welcome you with open arms if they were to see you in the next life. Molly Bish disappeared 7 years after Sarah and Holly, in June of 2000. She went missing while on lifeguard duty at a local pond in Warren, Massachusetts. She was found 3 years later in the woods. Phelps discusses the details surrounding her case, converses with a former cop named Tim McGuigan, and talks about the suspect, a man with a mustache who was seen smoking in a car near the pond by Molly's mother just the day before her daughter was taken. It is very possible Holly and Molly were taken by the same predator, but I still feel strongly that Holly was taken by Lent. From the podcast, I learned that a suspect in the Holly case was a man in a truck, and Lent drove a truck around that time. And most importantly, he has a history of committing this very kind of crime. I don't think that the connection between Holly and Molly, the fact that Molly wrote a letter to Holly's family, is at all a clue in this case, because I don't think there's any way that her killer would have known about that. I think that's just an eerie coincidence. Phelps explores the possibility that the killer in all 4 cases of Janice, Lisa, Holly, and Molly is a guy he calls the Hunter. Phelps has a convicted murderer he consults with called Raven. The relationship between the two of them is very reminiscent of the relationship between Clarice and Hannibal in Silence of the Lambs, and it's hard for me to take seriously for that reason. It feels like it's put in there for dramatic effect. He talks with Raven about motives for this kind of crime. He also talks with the ex-wife and daughter of the hunter, who inform him that the hunter was abusive to them. He had a torture chamber in his basement, which consisted of a wooden chair with straps on it. And he would often go hunting, but come home with nothing to show for it, and he was abusive to animals. He also liked to bury things in the backyard, which is another big red flag. His photo looked familiar to Lisa's sister, April, like she'd seen him before. Maybe he had stalked Lisa beforehand? The hunter's brother apparently looks a little like a sketch Holly's brother had made from a hazy memory. Did Holly's brother see anything on the day his sister was abducted, though? I find it unlikely. I don't remember reading anything to indicate that he was at all frightened that something had happened to Holly before they found that shoe in the road. Of course, I don't know as much information as those close to the case, but I feel like most likely this was a false memory, one that he kind of created after the fact. The ex-wife of the hunter thought that some of the kidnapped girls looked like her when she was younger. The hunter was discovered to have hair scrunchies from young girls in his home, but it's unknown as of the filming who they belonged to. He also has a brother who lived in Connecticut at the time two of the girls went missing from that area, so he does seem like someone who would be capable of committing these kinds of crimes, and he also killed an ex-girlfriend, so there's another reason why he could have committed these crimes. But as of today, none of these crimes have been solved, and only 2 bodies have been found. As for Sarah, her killer has been caught, but her body is still missing because Lent won't give up her location. And this really bothers me, the fact that she hasn't been found. I know that in all likelihood Lent killed her, but there's just still, because her body hasn't been found, there's still this lack of closure for me. And I feel it must be, it obviously must be so much worse for those who actually knew her and loved her. I'm just an outsider, and it bothers me. It must be awful for them. My thoughts are with the families, and I hope they receive their resolutions very soon. If you have any information on any of these cases, I know those involved would be grateful for tips. By the way, here is a review I wrote on Amazon after listening to the podcast Holly's Been Taken. It gives you a little bit of an idea of what this podcast includes and my thoughts on it. I have followed this case since I was Holly's age in 1993. I remember seeing Holly's posters in Massachusetts. The only time I went to Sturbridge Village was that fall. I wondered if I would find her there as I stood in what I remember resembling a clearing surrounded by woods. It was shortly after I saw Sara Anne Wood's poster in Maine, where I live, and was drawn to Sarah's case in a way that baffled everyone close to me. And then, during that trip to Sturbridge, Holly and Sarah became forever entwined in my mind. I would later see posters for Poly Class too, but Sarah and Holly were the 2 who haunted me most. I'd imagine them as they might have once been, as I listened to music on my Walkman. For example, I could picture Sarah dancing in her room to music playing on the tape player, just as I might do. To this day, if I hear certain songs by Billy Joel off his Concert or River of Dreams albums, it reminds me of that fall and that long car ride, listening to my cassettes and thinking about 2 lost girls who were so close in age to me and might have slightly resembled any number of girls I would meet on a daily basis. I just found out River of Dreams was released that August, in fact, so it was the soundtrack of that era for me. I remember the day I first read that Holly was found. I read that on 10/24/1993. It turned out to be a significant day in my life for another reason, so there's that connection too. I believe Louis Lent could have been the one who killed Holly. I believe this because he is a self-proclaimed serial killer. He fits the description of the guy the teen girl saw nearby that day, middle-aged with facial hair, and he drove a truck in January 1994. Not sure the color matched, though. But I am reading Hidden Demons by Marjorie Metzger now, and it says in there that he was in Sturbridge around the time of the abduction, and that he mentioned the name Holly to a witness who was scared by his stories. If that is true, that seems pretty suspicious to me. Also, it sounds like he preferred teen girls, but would settle for younger ones if need be. And he attacked both boys and girls. I will say this, if it was him, it's funny that both these cases, Sara and Holly's, grabbed my attention above all others I encountered. Maybe I picked up on something connecting them, but this is all pure speculation. I just wish there was more info on Lent in this podcast, as he is the one with that kind of very specific predatory history. And given what a rare kind of crime this is, it seems significant that he was known to kidnap children in the same state Holly was abducted from. I'm not sure where the police stand with him. This is a great podcast that dives deep into a case that deserves attention. I really appreciated getting to know more about the little girl who was my peer, even though I never met her. She liked to act, as I did at the time. She sang Boys to Men, which was a big band in the early 90s. They were part of my early 90s experience. Just as Holly represents the early 90s to me, too. The dark undercurrent that was always there behind the pop music and the bike rides with friends. And I mourned the fact that she missed out on so many experiences I had and the privilege of feeling nostalgia for childhood. Or maybe she does still feel nostalgia wherever she is now. I like to think her 90s kid heart beats on from beyond, and this evil person didn't take that away from her. My heart goes out to her parents, little brothers, cousins, friends, community. I don't know what she would have become if she had not reached the end of the road at 10, both literally and figuratively. Instead, she is part of that lost generation of 90s kids who could have been any one of us. But I will never forget her or the date August 5th because of her tragic story and the way it intersected with mine around early October 1993 when I first saw her picture at a toll booth. I recommend this podcast to those who want to know more about her case. I just want to conclude by saying that the thoughts and theories I express in this video are purely speculation and are not meant to hold any kind of weight or be any kind of tip in helping to solve this case. I do not claim to be an authority on the case of Holly Piirainen. I am very familiar with her tragic story, but I'm sure there is a lot I don't know as well. I just feel a connection with her because of my own personal journey in the fall of 1993, the way my life intersected with hers at that time, and how the music of Billy Joel played a role in it all. This is my narrative and the impact this case had on my life. And in the end, regardless of who her killer was, he is not who is important. Certainly I want him to be caught, and that's the role of those who actually know something that may be of value. For me, what's important is to just tell about my personal experience. Also, to focus on the interrupted lives and who these girls could have been. But more importantly, the impact they had on the world because they lived the lives they did. Thank you for joining me, and have a great day.